Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of E&Ftv. Today we've got something slightly different for you today, but we're joined by a good friend of mine, Chris Allan, who is the MD of Your D+I. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honoured. I've been watching the show for a while now, so it's my absolute honour to be here.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you know, obviously we've been talking for a while. I'd like to think we've become pretty good friends as well. Yeah, it's actually really good to have you on the show because, as you'll know, it's all been really focused around revenue management, commercial analytics, and those commercial functions within hospitality. But your business has a very different focus, which is obviously something that we're going to be coming on to. And I think it actually will be very valuable for a lot of people to actually listen to in the industry that I focus on. But first off, I want to say that we are doing something slightly different this time. We've actually prepared a couple of drinks before getting started. So tell us obviously what you've made.
So my shtick is tea, usually. So I run a podcast called Diversity, where we talk about D&I topics over a cup of tea. So with it being festive season, I have been brewing a chai gingerbread old-fashioned for the last week. So whiskey, chai gingerbread, tea with maple syrup, which is the secret ingredient, and orange juice.
Fantastic. That sounds actually very seasonal as well, to be fair.
It's a bit spicy, but yeah, it's good.
Whereas mine is actually more of a summer drink, to be quite honest with you. Mine is actually effectively a tequila sour. So we've got white tequila, then we've got sugar syrup, but obviously I just use water and sugar, and then with a hell of a lot of limes. There's about 5 limes in that thing. You see me sort of going, ooh, but cheers.
Cheers. Merry Christmas.
So everybody, as I say, Chris has got as Chris actually said, he's got his podcast Diversity, which is absolutely fantastic, and we will be putting a link in the description below. So this is more of a drinks and interview rather than diversity. It doesn't have the same ring to it, but
I mean, it's diverse in itself.
It's got to be like that. So, in terms of obviously the episodes, how we like to start it is understanding, I suppose, a bit about you first off. So understanding a bit about your background, of course, obviously what brought you to starting your own business. And I suppose just for the relevance of the show as well, what exactly that business does focus on. Because as I say, it does step slightly outside of what we usually got on the show. So please do. Go ahead, Chris. Tell us a bit about yourself.
So I've had a very, very varied career, shall we say. So I left school when I was 16 because I was told not to come back by my English teacher. And from there, I worked in retail. I was kind of a retail boy. My mum got me my first ever job within retail in Matalan. My very first day, I remember vividly, was in ladies' underwear, which for a 16-year-old boy, terrifying. From there, I was at Matalan for 5 years and kind of really got a bit of a training bug. So I was involved in the rollout of a new EPOS system, training the existing staff on that and customer service and things like that. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the job. Throughout my 20s, I was kind of everything you could think of within retail I did. I worked in mobile phone sales. I worked for a branch of 3 Mobile, where I had to dress up entirely in pink because back then the market was aimed at women to buy more mobile phones. I was also 24 stone at the time as well, so wearing lots of pink and being 24 stone and having pink hair was a really interesting sight to see walking up and down Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow. However, it worked and we were really successful. Unfortunately, they pulled the plug, and that was a bit of a theme throughout my career. So as much as I loved retail, I was made redundant 4 times in 10 years, which really takes its toll, especially this time of year. So obviously what's going on in the world just now, I can really relate to a lot of people losing their jobs when it comes to retail at this time of year. And yeah, kind of had a bit of a break from retail for a little bit. I sold loft insulation and cavity wall insulation to the masses in Scotland. I have worked for a Chinese solar panel company selling solar panels in IKEA. lots and lots of different things. And then I ended up in higher education randomly. And I think it's kind of put me on the path that I wanted to be on without really knowing it. So I joined higher education within the careers team, and a lot of my role was around supporting businesses and how to attract and retain students within their organisation. And when I first joined, I was focused on computing and maths, and that's where I started to notice the gender gap when it came to applications and actually who was successful for the role. And we had quite a large number of female students. It just seems to be this bias that people have going into tech, or had at the time, that it was more male students than anything else. So we wanted to do something about it. So we developed a Women in STEM event where we get leaders within the industry to come in and actually talk to our female students or female identifying students about kind of the opportunities that were available to them within their businesses. From there, I got a promotion and then was more focused on D&I in general within higher education, working again with businesses on how to attract, retain and develop students from underrepresented groups. In particular, low family income students, single parent households, low socioeconomic groups. And that really kind of played on me and kind of really got to me, and actually the upheaval and the amount of work that these students have to do, not only to get through life, but actually to then get to university and then find a graduate job from there, when they could have a part-time job in themselves. So was there for 2.5 years, ran multiple events. So Thinklusive being one of the biggest events that we ran, which was again educating businesses on this type of student. So businesses, as we know, are really focused in the D&I space on gender, on race, and on sexuality. However, no one was really talking about social mobility. So we wanted to kind of do something to educate businesses on what social mobility was and actually where these students came from and how these businesses could help. Really successful. We had about 30 to 40 pretty hefty names attend. So from Santander to the Royal Navy to the Army, all talking about their experiences, all talking about the recruitment processes and actually how we could help them develop their recruitment processes and making it more inclusive. So yeah, that was kind of my higher education piece, and kind of really got me involved in the diversity and inclusion space. Had a bit of personal trauma in the August of last year, where my mum suffered a massive stroke. So took some time out just because I wasn't coping very well. Something I'd never done before, hadn't really ever suffered from anxiety or anything like that before. So it was kind of a whole new experience for me. During this time, I was approached by a diversity and inclusion consultancy who were interested in what it was that I was doing and what I could do for their organization. Was brought in to disrupt them as a business, and also to disrupt the industry. If I'm perfectly honest, they weren't really up for being disrupted, and kind of pushing it as much and as far as it could go. But I was trying to disrupt the industry as much as I can through my own ways. So I started with them in January this year. Was there for 3 months, quite successful. Obviously, COVID then reared its ugly head, and there was talk of redundancy again. Obviously, we were furloughed when the government intervened. Just as we were furloughed, I also lost my mum at the end of March. And that kind of flipped things for me. So it kind of put a lot of things into perspective. Was I doing enough within my life? Was I doing enough within my business life? I wasn't making enough of a difference. And the answer to that was no. I couldn't do that working for someone else because I really wanted to push more. So Your D+I was formed during the summer, and formed with a slightly different narrative to most D&I companies out there. So we're really big on language and actually using language that people use. I think sometimes we forget that we're talking to people when we're conveying things around D&I, and sometimes we forget we can use humor to have conversations around things. So one thing, for instance, that's always stuck with me is there is a TED Talk. I can't remember who it's by, and it's called Rent a Minority. and it's by an Asian woman who is also a lesbian, and she was getting fed up of how much further we still have to go with regards to equality within business. So she set up this website called Rent a Minority as a joke. It was very tongue-in-cheek, it was very slapstick, and it was about how your business could rent a minority for the day for that upcoming photo shoot for your website, or for when head office were coming in and you needed that representation. Totally ridiculous. What's more ridiculous is that about 15,000 businesses signed up to the website. And if you read the website, and I'll send you the link, it's very, very tongue-in-cheek. So how people thought this was a good idea to sign up, I don't know. The worst thing about it is that 5,000 minorities also signed up to the website, thinking that they could make a difference to these businesses. So it shows you how far we've got to come, with a little bit of a humorous twist onto it. And I think that's what's really important to have when we're kind of having these conversations. So we try and kind of have that element, and we run a number of workshops. And we try and take a different approach to our workshops. So we have things like the bigger picture, which is our unconscious bias training, where I will stand up in front of a room, or virtually as it is at the moment, and ask people to go to town on me about what I look like. And instantly people are like, oh, you're a bigger guy, you've got blue eyes, you've got blonde hair. And that's about it. Usually that's all they can really say. But it's about things like, well, did you know that I was gay? Do you know that I'm colorblind? Do you know that I suffer from crippling anxiety? Do you know that I have a dog? And things like that. So really stupid things that people don't really understand because they just look at you on face value. And that's what unconscious bias is all about, is taking someone on face value and judging them based on that. So we really kind of try and take it from a different angle. Putting yourself on the block is interesting. Sometimes you get some really interesting comments. What's that?
Very brave.
Yeah, I'm tough skinned. I'm Scottish. I'm tough skinned. So yeah, we have that. We have the A to T of LGBT, where we break down the LGBT language for people and the dictionary, because even as a gay man, I find it quite confusing. So if I can find it confusing, someone who's heterosexual, who's never really experienced it before, may also find it quite confusing. So we break down things like sexuality, what non-binary means, what it is to be trans, and also things around the word queer, which is kind of now quite prominent within the community, as it's used quite a lot. So it's about, if you're an HR practitioner or a recruiter or anybody within a business and a member of your team comes to you and says, I identify as queer, what does that actually mean? And how can you have a conversation with someone about it? Because me, myself, it still gets my back up a little bit, because I grew up in the 90s and the word queer wasn't a nice thing. However, I now understand that people use it to identify themselves. So we have that. We have a privilege workshop where we look at white privilege, which has come off the back of what's happened this year, really identifying our privilege, but also looking at other elements of privilege as well, because I think it's important to understand all aspects of privilege before you can understand your white privilege. So socioeconomic privilege, for instance, institutional privilege, which is something quite new that I'm learning about at the moment, which is working for a university and actually not realizing there's more outside of a university, and actually there's this privilege that comes with that. There is association privilege and bias as well. And that's obviously if you perhaps are white and you are married to someone who's black, and your boss meets you and like, oh, I didn't realize you had a black wife. That kind of association bias and privilege that people have because they just didn't realize that type of thing could happen. So we talk about that. We have language as well. So we have, it's all about the banter, which is our kind of flagship workshop. And that really focuses on language in the workplace, the change in protected characteristics. So for instance, did you know that being an ethical vegan is now a protected characteristic, which came into play from January this year? And actually the impact that could have not only for the person, but the working environment as well. And the change in language that we've had, I think, within business, especially during lockdown, we've gone instantly to instant messenger and messaging people instead of picking up the phone and having a conversation. So it could be that you send a message to someone and that tone of voice could be picked up completely differently at the other end. So it's all about how we communicate with each other better. and kind of really calling people out for the type of language that's used within the workplace sometimes. So saying things like "that's so gay," implying that both gay and stupid are the same thing. Looking at microaggressions as well. So saying to someone who has an afro, "Oh, I'd love to touch your hair," and actually that's not cool. It's not the right thing to be saying or to be doing, and actually helping people realize that. So there's
that I've noticed actually is how, I suppose, is dynamic the word? I don't know. How things have changed and how things are probably going to change continuously for probably quite a long time, until people actually start to, one, embrace it, but two, fully understand it, and finally be able to implement it within their lives, within businesses, within their social groups. I suppose that's obviously something that you're massively involved in. But yeah, that's one thing that sort of comes straight at me, is the time that sort of this has taken, but also how much more time it's going to take for us to actually embrace it, I suppose.
It is interesting. So I found that there are some battles that you just can't win. So for instance, I had a conversation with my other half's grandma about privilege, and she just didn't get it because she's of a certain age group, and there's just no way that she wanted to understand it, I think, more than anything else. But at the same time, having a conversation with his dad and putting him into a different situation that he wasn't necessarily used to make him understand. So I said to him, when you were growing up and you went to a toy shop, you were able to look at the shelf and look at all the toys on the shelf. Every single toy there represented what you looked like. And he was like, well, yeah, of course. And I said, okay, so put yourself into the shoes of a black kid and then go into that same toy shop. What do you then see on the shelves? And he was like, oh, I totally get it. And it's little things like that, little moments like that make a huge, huge difference. So we're now able to have a more open conversation about it. His argument is that he doesn't think privilege is necessarily the right word, and sometimes it's not. However, just being able to have that type of conversation with them can make a big, big difference on them. So, yeah. But yeah, so we have the workshops. We're launching a social mobility workshop in the new year as well. So that's going to really educate people around social mobility and this untapped talent pool that exists. I'm a big fan of the social mobility pledge, but I'm also not a big fan of the social mobility pledge. I think it has its flaws. Because we don't hold people accountable for who signs the pledge. So one of our pledges is to hold businesses accountable who have signed it. So we want to help educate businesses who are on it as to what it actually means and how to attract and retain this talent that exists within this kind of lost side of D&I, I suppose. And then with that as well, so we've got jobs boards coming out next year as well, which will specifically focus on underrepresented groups. So and then we have an auditing and consultancy side of the business as well. So we can help businesses with policy writing, and then we can do a full D&I audit within your organization. So we can look at your recruitment, your marketing, what your current objectives and strategy is, and actually how D&I can impact that, and actually help your business move forward. So
There's a lot of strings to the old bow, isn't there?
just a few, and there's more to come as well.
Well, I think one of the particular ones, as you said, about the job board that you're launching next year, it's something that we've spoken about previously, in the past, but I think it's a fantastic idea. And I think that will really engage with a lot of people that are in those minority groups. I think that's a brilliant idea, to be honest. I suppose in terms of going forward then, because obviously, as I said before, from what you were saying, it's very much the embrace, people embracing it, businesses, let's say, embracing it, but then actually believing and understanding all of it, and then obviously implementing it. So I suppose my first question to you is, what do you see the challenges being going forward to get businesses focusing more on D&I, and obviously not just focusing on it, because anybody, as we've actually said this in the past as well, anybody can sort of put on a front and put on a show to say, hey, we're focusing on D&I and we're going to be doing the right things and all this sort of stuff, and saying all the right things. But to get people actually embracing it, getting them to implement it, what do you think the biggest challenges will be going forward?
I think the biggest challenge for going forward is this year. What's happened in 2020? We've seen a lot of knee-jerk reactions based on what happened to George Floyd over the summer. And there's been a lot of knee-jerk reactions with businesses who have hired Dni managers on a 12 or 18-month contract. Dni can't be fixed within 12 to 18 months. It's a continuous process. It's always ongoing. So I think that's going to be the biggest issue. Some things will be put into place within businesses for 12 months. They'll look great for the social media and all this kind of stuff. And then actually they're going to lose their sense of inclusion, I think, after that period. So they're going to bring things in, get rid of the Dni manager once they've done that, and then what happens after that. And I think inclusion's the thing we forget about the most. I actually think the diversity side is quite easy for businesses. It's quite easy to change the way you recruit. It's quite easy to change your job descriptions to make them more diverse. It's actually how you keep this talent within your organization. Because if someone doesn't have a sense of belonging or feel like they are included, then they won't stay. And this is what's happening with Gen Z now, in particular. They won't stand for BS. And if they don't see an organization doing something, they will either call them out or they'll leave if they're already in that organization. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and she said that she was thinking about applying for a company and read about the sustainability statement, and actually it wasn't very good and they were a massive polluter. And she was like, should I call them out for it? And I was like, well, do you want to go into that business and help them? Or do you want to kind of stunt your application process by calling them out whilst you're applying for the job? So, and she's called them out on it. So, but yeah, I think that the biggest challenge will be inclusion. I think that's definitely the one thing that businesses need to get right going forward. And I think the knee-jerk reaction will be great to bring the diversity in and actually to educate around diversity. But if we don't continue to preach about inclusion within your business, then we'll be back to square dot in a couple of years.
Well, as you say, you don't want it to turn into a trend, do you? You don't want it to turn into one of these, and I'm not, and by no means am I saying that it is, don't get me wrong, but you don't want it to become this fad where it kind of goes, everybody, as you say, rushes into it. They do all the box ticking, but there's no genuine, that's my point, is there's no genuine, or there, in those situations anyway, there's no genuine passion or wanting to understand it and wanting to implement. You're just looking to box tick for, as you said, the social media, or as you know, for your HR purposes.
Yeah.
When in fact, if everybody did embrace it and they did understand it and they did implement it, your business would be better off, your reputation would be better off, your employees would be better off. You know, generally it'd just be better for your, you know, your market, for your economy in general. I think there's very little downside from what I can see anyway.
I think what will be interesting to see is what Sainsbury's revenue is like at the end of next year, based on the stance that they've taken, because they've taken a we ain't pulling no punches here kind of approach, and they've been very upfront that we will not tolerate racism. We will promote our black colleagues, and they've stood up to politicians, they've stood up to celebrities, people like Lawrence Fox, for instance, and have stood by what they've done. However, there are other retailers who, and I won't name names, who took the opposite approach and actually pulled an advert down because of the backlash that Sainsbury's had, which is really, really sad.
Yeah.
And I just think it's funny when we talk about this advert that's caused such a huge uproar, but then no one's complaining about Kevin the Carrot. It's just like, we can relate to a carrot, but we can't relate to a black family. It's just, it blows my mind.
It's one of these things again, isn't it? It's mind-boggling in the times that we're in now.
Yeah,
this is something that is actually being debated, spoken about, argued about, and it's beyond me. I find it absolutely crazy.
Yeah. Even the Vicar of Dibley this week has had backlash because of their stance on Black Lives Matter. They've done an episode in particular which focuses on the death of George Floyd, and you see the main character take a knee to pay the respects to George Floyd, and the BBC have had over 100 complaints about it. Yeah. And it's just, if you don't want to watch it, if you're not interested, switch it over.
this is it. You have an option. You don't.
Yeah.
That you're the one tuning in, and it's almost this sense of it's almost this sense of wanting that opportunity to get annoyed and to have your rant. And we live in that sort of society almost. Unfortunately, we have so much access to social media and other things where people can be keyboard warriors, where they can just say what they want, and it's a faceless.
That's exactly what's happening just now. Yeah.
Do you know what? Actually, it was one of these things I saw to do with the Sainsbury's advert, and it was actually my partner was talking about it, and she said that there was a lady that was actually she was taking the names of the people that were commenting and making racist slurs and so on, and she was actually cross-referencing their names on their social media platforms with their LinkedIn profiles and contacting their employers.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, whoa, that's a hell of a move. But again, if people are so forthright in their comments and not exactly censoring themselves and not worrying about what they're saying, and not worried about the impact it will have on other people, then I think too right. Why not put the face on them?
And what's frightening is it is happening on LinkedIn as well. So the head of HR for Sainsbury's also put out a statement, and it's had over 4,000 comments on it. And I'd say about 60% of that are from people saying, well, I don't want to see this. And there was one guy in particular who I got into a bit of a heated debate with, who said that 80% of the UK's advertisement now features a person of colour. And I was like, well, firstly, where are you getting your stats from and what channel are you watching? And he said only 11% of the adverts feature white people. And I was like, so where's this other 9%? Like, where are your stats? Like, what? Like, if someone isn't willing to back up what they're saying just because someone doesn't look like you, then you don't really have an argument. And that was my argument to him. I said, you've had. I assumed his age. I thought he was in his 40s because he looked like he was in his 40s. And I said, so you've obviously had representation on TV for the last 40 years. Now within the last 12 months, you've had slightly less representation than what you've had before. And now you feel attacked. Like, think about that. It just,
Yeah. I suppose sort of moving on slightly from obviously the challenges that you're potentially going to see going forward. Now looking at sort of the trends. So the trends within Dni going forward. So for 2021, what do they look like for you?
I hate the trends, but the trends happen in any industry, and we've seen it happen this year, for instance. So as part of our podcast, we cover a number of different topics, and for instance, we covered neurodiversity just after a Neurodiversity Awareness Week. And it did really badly with regards to listens because people had stopped talking about it. So within Dni, you have these constant trends because we've got so many trigger dates throughout the year where you have Martin Luther King Day in January, you have Pride, LGBT History Month in February, you've got International Women's Day in March, and so on and so forth. There's so many things that happen throughout the year that you've always got these kind of mini trends, I suppose, that are constantly happening. I think disability is starting to be spoken about more, and I think that will continue as we hopefully carry on working from home, because it's going to open up so many more opportunities to those with disabilities who can't get access to the office or for whatever reason don't feel comfortable within the office. And it's not even necessarily with a disability. If you suffer badly with anxiety, going into an office situation, which a lot of people will, it's going to be really tough. So hopefully we've now adapted and we all have learned that we can work from home, we can do our jobs from home. And if that's an option your employer can give you, great. And I think that's what we need to see more of in the new year. I think we're going to see more mental health implications based on what's happened this year as well. Hopefully with businesses realizing this and actually putting things into place. There's a fantastic organization called Fund Apps, which a friend of mine, Pat, works for. He's the head of people, and they've just implemented their Wellbeing 2.0, which they have said that they'll pay up to £40 a month for you to go to the gym, is standard. So, or you can use the money to do yoga or anything like that. So they're really committed that even outside of work, your wellness is really important to us. They've signed a contract with Sanctus, so you've now got external support when it comes to mental health support, things like that. So hopefully we're going to see more of that happening with businesses. They're not a large business as well, so they've proved that even SMEs can still do something like that for their teams. And I think we'll continue to see a narrative along Black Lives Matter carried on into next year from this year, which I think is really important. I think we'll see more representation. We're already starting to see some awards now recognising Black businesses, for instance, which has never been done before. I'm hoping we'll come away from the term BAME, just because I've got a bit of a personal issue with it. I don't think it's very productive within a business to have this term to bunch everybody together. So yeah, I think there'll be a couple of key trends that come into next year. I'm hoping D&I in general is a continuous conversation that we're going to have and hopefully impact more people.
I was going to say, if you've got anything to do with it, it certainly will be.
Oh, thank you. Is that the talking?
Possibly. But in terms of, I suppose, going forward again, so in terms of what you've got going on, either you personally or obviously the business, what's been going on with you guys and any exciting stuff going on going forward?
A lot, yeah. So at the minute, we're doing a lot of planning for 2021. Part of what we offer as a business is we try and make an impact to our community. And that's something that I always wanted to do when developing a business, to be able to give back to people. So we've had this conversation before about having a charitable committee set up in January, where we'll focus on 4 charitable events throughout the year next year, where people, instead of paying our fee, will make a donation to a charity of choice. The first one potentially being around period poverty, which initially I was challenged by a lady called Sophie, who runs a brilliant organisation called Yes She Can, around this. And initially I kind of was like, I feel a bit uncomfortable about it because I'm a cisgendered male. So why should I talk about that type of thing? And actually, why shouldn't I talk about that type of thing? Why shouldn't I learn about what happens in the poverty that comes with that? So we're going to be looking at charity to help support around International Women's Day. We're going to be looking at finding a smaller LGBT plus organisation to support for Pride Month. We'll also be looking at a social mobility charity towards the end of the year and a disability charity as well. So that's something kind of slightly away from Your D+I, and just being able to have more of an impact on our community. We have a jobs board launching, which we've touched upon, which will be supported by Dink, who are a new diversity and inclusion app, which is fantastic. It's been started by 2 straight, white, middle-class males, and as allies, I think they're fantastic, the work that they're putting into this. So we're working quite closely with them, with the jobs board. There's been slight progression with the jobs board as well, so it'll now be split into 2. So we'll be focusing on early careers and future careers. Businesses will have an opportunity to advertise their roles with us and sponsor the coaching of 10 students from underrepresented groups as well, which is amazing. And then we'll also be setting up a membership pack with Dink as well. So if you as a business want to use their platform for your resources and for a space to kind of do all your D&I stuff, you can do that. You'll also have unlimited access to our workshops and unlimited access to the jobs board as well as part of that. So a lot of exciting stuff happening there. And our workshops will be going on demand, fingers crossed, in February. So they'll be in bite-sized chunks, so you can do them whenever you want, wherever you want. Really accessible, because we've realized with the change in landscape in business, not everybody kind of wants to sit in front of a Zoom call for a couple of hours to do some training. So if they can do it in their own time, then that's an option that we want to be able to give them as well. So that's February. So yeah, we've got a couple of big plans, hopefully some in-person events next year. Fingers crossed that the vaccine goes well and no one turns into zombies. That's our focus for next year. So I'm really excited about next year. I think it's going to be a good one for us.
Oh, fantastic. And I don't know if it would have come up, but when you were talking about with that focus on the young people and providing that support to them, for anybody that didn't see it, I put my thumbs up because that is something I'm massively massively passionate about. As you know, in fact, I appeared on your podcast, which is
it's coming out next year. Yeah, so
that's something that's very dear to my heart. So fantastic and massive kudos to you, because I think it's something that is massively under focused on, or however you want to talk about it. The fact is we're not doing enough, and we need to be doing more. So if we have more pioneers like yourself, like me, like others that are pushing this message, then fantastic. Of course, for anybody that is watching this from sort of my industry or my market, if you like, from the hospitality world, this is one of the most exciting episodes because it was something completely different. So anybody that is watching this, that has got this far through the episode, and you do want to have just an open conversation about D&I, I have no doubt that Chris would love to have a chat with you.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely.
I know how passionate you are, Chris, and I know that in all our industries, to be quite honest with you, D&I needs to have a focus. It needs more. And the focus, and as I said, the focus, implementation, but also the full understanding of what it is. Those, from my perspective anyway, are the things that I see being a challenge for anybody in business. But there is support out there with businesses like yours. So anybody watching, please do. I'll link Chris's details in the description below, and contact him because he is absolutely brilliant. He's fantastically knowledgeable, and he's always up for a conversation, especially if there's a drink involved.
or both, I'm in.
I was going to say, I'm not doing all right at the moment. But Chris, obviously, thank you so much for joining us today. I know how busy you are at the moment, so I do appreciate it. Taking your time out on a Friday, on the run up to Christmas, so I do appreciate it. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. And guys, don't forget to see who's on next week's episode now.